now.
You got it?
Yeah, is that okay? Should
Okay. So we are live on YouTube. I'm going to start the recording, and then Jose Luis will introduce you, Paul. Okay?
Thank you. Yeah.
All
Hello,
right.
everyone. Hello, hola. I hope you can hear me well. Yeah. Great. We're really, really lucky today. It's a real pleasure and a delight to have Paul Gravett with us in this conference. I want to say very few things about him. I'm sure most of you people who have high expertise on comics know pretty well him. He's a critic, journalist, is a widely published author. He is the world's foremost comic historian you can think of, and curator and broadcaster. Okay, so he's among the many things he had done, he launched this Cape magazine in which he gathered a lot of alternative cartoonists of the day in the early 80s and 90s. He has made very plenty of collaborations for the Guardian, the Telegraph, the Comics International, and many other press. He's, as I say, a widely published author. Amongst his many fascinating and books specializing in international comics. I will mention graphic novels, stories to change your life. Okay, which was Collins 2005 is a magnificent compendium of the best graphic novels section by section in focus and with guided readers, so to say, and associations and memory, as he calls memory tricks, so we can go directly to the kind of genre that we like within the novel. And I also was curious to find a quote from the Lee. Comics will be the culture of the year 3794. He also published Magnesia, which is a great British comedies before that, great British comics from with Stanbury in 2006. As I say, Mangasia, the definitive guide to Asian comics, as an extraordinary volume charting the evolution of manga back from the 19th century. So it's just a long one into the back in time in the future. The crime comic is the Mammoth Book of Best Crime Comics. I love the title, I might say. Edited by himself and designed by Peter Stanbury. It's published in 2008. It's really complete, and I think it's of the companion, as I say, of the greatest crime comics ever. He also published 1001 comics with to read before you die. Okay. And I was thinking of the quibble, 1001 books to die before you read. I don't know if I was going to get it the other way around. Which was also
not a very positive sounding title. I mean, the French title is much nicer. I think it was Sans à lire dans votre vie. So while you're alive, not before you. There's a bit more pressure when it says before you die, you know.
Right. It's an amazing collection. It was also sort of liked in Spanish in 2012, I think.
Yeah, it came out from Rijalbo, I think. Yeah.
Comics Art, 2013. Is a real complete analysis of the phenomenal Bruce of graphic novels, widely acclaimed. And his latest is the one I have here, which I have really enjoyed on
Process
Simmons, which was published last year, I believe, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah, Process Simmons.
In the accent. So as a curator, I mean, there's a lot of exhibitions in London, in the British Library. Magnesia curator as well, retrospectives of the work of Charles Schulz and Thor Jensen, broadcaster as well. He has taken part recently, I think it was a few days ago in Cumbria, the Lake District.
Yeah, the Lakes Festival, that's right, yeah.
Festival, right, and he's taken part in multiple projects. He's a director of Cartoon Art Trust, promoting
that was my job, yeah, not currently. That was my job back in the 90s.
All right. And he also coordinates several comic festivals, like the Comica, I think.
Well, Comica, yes, Comica is somewhat in hibernation right now, but not just because of COVID. It's been for a couple of years now, but that's not something I'm again driving as much as we were doing previously. Yeah.
So welcome and thank you very much.
Introduction. I'm sorry it had to take so long to introduce me, basically.
No, it's fine, and I really enjoyed preparing.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Great. And this Congress is a very exciting one. Congratulations on bringing it all together, and especially in these times, and having such a rich program. It's great to be part of it. I can perhaps just push the button. Maybe it'll change the image. There we go. Yeah. Okay. Get underway. Yeah, this is just a charming image, by the way, by, of course, it's from Le Petit Nicolas by Goscinny and Sempe. It's just this great image of kids enjoying comics, basically, and they're not really meant to. They're in a book. I think maybe it's a bookshop. I think not a library, but it's just there. I think that the caption or I just came with this was something like "Comics make you active or make you want to act out what you're seeing on the pages," kind of thing. It was that was the thought. And a very joyful image of enjoying comics as a child. I think it's something that so many people have deep-rooted in a deep-rooted love from childhood of this amazing medium that you can never grow tired of. So yeah, this is another flashback. There aren't many photographs. I did read lots of comics when I was growing up. There aren't many that my dad was a very keen photographer and home movie maker. That's a whole other topic. But this is a shot of me, I think around the late 60s. I'm reading a copy. I actually have done detective work. It's a magazine called Fantastic, which was the weekly reprint in the UK of Marvel comics. And it had stuff like Lee and Kirby's Thor and early X-Men and Doctor Strange and stuff. And I was hypnotized by this. I'd grown up on British comics, but once you saw the Marvel comics, you went, oh, this is the next step. So that was, and I haven't left, it's called a deck chair. I haven't left that deck chair basically since that time. I've been continuously hypnotized by comics. I think my entire life, I think I should get help, perhaps. This is beyond addiction. This is actually something I'm very passionate about. I believe this is such an extraordinary art form that it's wonderful to see so much attention and appreciation happening, which perhaps even certainly back then I could never have imagined.
This is in London, Paul?
This is actually my grandparents' place in Buckinghamshire in High Wycombe. To give you the setting, actually, that if I look in front of me, there is a tennis court behind their home. It's only a little one-story bungalow, but they have the tennis court on a hill. So it's a very bizarre way to play tennis because you're either shooting downhill or uphill. They don't get many tennis courts out, tennis pitches, whatever we call them, on a hill.
But you were more interested in comics than in tennis.
Definitely. Yeah. I wasn't that good at any sports really. But, yeah, I played some tennis on the hill. Yeah. So there we go. And I thought I'd show this because this is, there are moments we all have, I think, in comics becoming more important to us in our lives when you suddenly have these various epiphanies, these key moments when suddenly you go, this is something I didn't know. So this was the comic shop I went to when I don't even know how old I was, but it was around in the late 60s, probably only a year or two after that previous photograph. As a birthday treat, my mum took me and my brother up to Soho in London. Now, Soho was a very seedy area of London, which, my middle-class parents were not really too sure about. You want to go up to London, to Soho? And we went to Dark They Were and Golden-Eyed in their very first shop, which is in a street called Bedfordbury. On the right, you can see the owners of the shop. And the lady at the shop there, she swore to blue heaven. She had used the F word and the S word, every word you could imagine. And my poor mum was so upset that I was in this comic shop, or science fiction and comic shop, which had this really kind of tense, loud-mouthed manageress, shall we say, running it. But I'd never seen so many comics I hadn't been able to find before. And even more important to me, perhaps the one thing that was most important is I bought there my first fanzine, my first magazine about comics. I didn't know those things existed. And that was all just from seeing the advertising in I think there must have been a plug for it in Fantastic, in the Marvel comic. But from that point on, I was going, oh my gosh, I don't just have to buy the ones I can find in on my local newsstands, in the the revolving spinner racks. These are American comics coming over as ballast, but I can actually go to a shop devoted to them, or mostly it was that plus science fiction. So yeah, I had to get back to that place.
The most
So
important comic book shops are still in the Soho in London, right?
Yeah, there's still. I mean, Forbidden Planet, of course, is what this
Forbidden Planet,
big
correct?
one. Gosh, and Orbital sadly
Correct.
sadly had to close. They've had a big kind of crisis of identity, I think. Even though they won the Spirit of Retail Award only about two years ago or so, had a lovely gallery space. They've sadly gone. But yeah, we still have them, not just in the centre. There are a few more around the city, and a very good one in Putney called 30th Century, which is really just about the best for the deep back issue buying, especially also for British comics, which is not always, they're not always stocked so much in depth by the other shops, for example. But yeah, so that was good. And then the other sort of poem, I'm still in my teens when this is happening, was going, again, a treat, probably just in the new year, so it would be 71, going to the ICA, that's the Institute of Contemporary Arts, on the Mall, just down the road from Buckingham Palace. You can just wave to Liz and Phil in their little palace just up the road there. And that was, for the first exhibition, really the first big art show of comics, as you can see, called ARG. And it was brain melting, because I'd never seen original artwork from comics. And even more brain melting was that they were exhibiting pages of Jack Kirby's new work for DC, including pages from the first issue of Forever People and New Gods, which weren't going to come out for at least a couple more months, even in America, let alone coming over on the ship to the UK. And I didn't know at the time that Kirby had left Marvel Comics, because in those days, in the pre-internet, and only just discovering fanzines, I didn't have the news that we all have now, where every moment you can get some news item about who's drawing Batman this week or something. But back then you didn't hear the news that quickly, certainly not in the UK. And so I was completely dumbfounded. But what is this stuff? This isn't. These aren't Marvel characters. I was just, so those images were absolutely. I was just absolutely blown away by them. And of course, it was also just seeing the originals in their full scale made you realize the work and the sheer beauty and effort that went into making these pages of comics, which you don't realize when you're looking at them on their newsprint, sort of fuzzy printing. You don't realize what they look like in the originals. So that gave me a tremendous boost of interest too. So yeah, these were life-changing experiences, basically, that I think everyone pretty much has at some stage. We're jumping ahead a little bit here, but yeah, I'm also very keen on comics just basically not getting stuck. That has got to be, perhaps that's one of my sort of mottos, if you like, my credos, is that there's always the plot, because comics do get stuck in formula, in genre, in nostalgia, in reboots. We know what I'm talking about. And we all love stuff that we read when we were 10 or 12, usually it's that kind of age, but we don't have to necessarily always read that for our entire lives. And sometimes you might have to step out of that and go into areas that are very strange. And I always thought that this is where the medium is going to change and develop and do stuff that can still push it forward, not get stuck in formula, basically, and repetition. But we know, of course, comics have to rely on that too. Some of the greatest comics, I mean, what is peanuts if not repetition over every day? But it's also, of course, beautifully nuanced and subtle and changes with time, and is also a rich work of lifetime's work. Anyway, fast fiction was a place, literally a physical place to go, come and meet if you're making your own comics. And it was a very simple idea to situate, just be to buy a table, basically, at these enormous, basically secondhand comic selling fairs, the comic marts in London, in Westminster, just opposite the Houses of Parliament, actually, is where the building still is, held every 2 months on a Saturday. And I was going, well, there's nobody here selling people's self-published stuff. And I was discovering some interesting work, stuff that I thought had needed a wider distribution. So I helped set up a table, and then we set up a distribution service where people could order the comics from me, and I'd send them out to people. And so rather than sending off 12 checks or bits of money or something, you get them all from one place, near enough anyway. And so every 2 months I'd make this sheet. You can see some of the ones there, which would be a listing of covers and little descriptions. I didn't necessarily like everything that was being produced, but I thought everything deserved a chance. I would never say this is absolute crap, don't buy it. I believed that things would find their level, and along the way I found lots of incredible artists, I think, that were emerging. On the bottom left, by the way, there is where some of the artists were together with me at one of the comic festivals in the UK at that time. But the small press where stuff happens, I think.
We're talking about the 70s here?
This is actually 81.
Okay.
Yeah, because you're right. 70s we'd already had in the UK plenty of alternative comics, underground. You had Hunt Emerson, obviously, and other Brian Talbot, all coming through that scene. The UK underground scene was very, very strong in the 70s. The 80s, it moved to Xerox, basically, and to small press, more so. And had a kind of slightly punk, new wave, have a go at doing it, DIY kind of approach, which I liked very much. Oh, yes. This is one of the nicknames that Eddie Campbell, whose picture, I think he was in the previous one. Anyway, Eddie Campbell was one of the artists that emerged from this. Yeah, it's a very nice compliment. I wasn't quite sure what it meant, I think, at first, because the image to me of a man at the crossroads is like a traffic manager, sort of like a policeman or something, I suppose. And the other problem is that, are you actually, is anyone paying attention to you, or people just driving straight by you on these crossroads? But as somebody who loves connecting and networking, I guess pre-internet, a lot of stuff, I was in a position of at least knowing quite a lot of people, even at this early stage, who were all mostly by mail, through the mail, who were making interesting comics worldwide. And I'd been to Europe a lot growing up. Fortunately, I had French from school. I studied French. I was fluent. I studied German. I'd been on quite a few family holidays, luckily, to different parts of Europe. So not Spain, actually, not to get to Spain till later, unfortunately. But anyway, the point is, everywhere I went, of course, I was also learning about what was there. So anyway, that's that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the one thing I've been quite wary of is getting sucked into the industry. I think I've probably kept away from that because I just felt that if it became something that too much of a job, and it wasn't a job, it's too much of working with other people's visions of what comics should be, and that you have to produce another issue of the same thing over and over, I would get rather dispirited, because for me the medium has to be pushed, has to be stretched all the time. And so this was a completely lucky break that I happened to be able to work on this magazine that was just the kind of edgy, interesting, diverse anthology that the UK needed. Much as I loved, around the same time, we'd already got 2000 AD, we've got Warrior came in around the same time as Psst, in fact, just slightly after, I think, but it was all around the same time, the early 80s. The fresh thing about Psst was it had lots of ridiculous amounts of money thrown at it, thanks to a very wealthy millionaire couple, Serge and Henriette Boissevin, who sadly aren't with us anymore. They loved French comics. They couldn't understand why we didn't have bande dessinée in Britain. So they decided to put some money into making a magazine that would find the talent in the UK and put it into a deluxe magazine. I mean, really too deluxe. I can remember them being a meeting. I was only ever a sort of an editorial assistant, promoter, this kind of thing. But I can remember them having a meeting with their printer, explaining to them that the cover price they were selling the magazine at was less than the unit price to actually print it, because they were they did a free poster inside, had color. It was printed on the most luxurious paper. It was not a financially viable or practical magazine at all, as you can tell even by the fact it was called Psst and had possibly the smallest logo ever seen on any magazine, let alone a comic. And so it was a work of madness. And it was an amazing first job to have in in comics. I mean, starting with something which I thought was ideal for my passion. Yeah, and that's jumping a bit here. Yeah, that's me when I think about the year 87. Yeah, so that's when that's just around the time that actually was coming to a close. I think maybe just about. I think, and this is my partner Peter. This is when we met in 87, and we decided to make our own magazine, as you mentioned earlier, and we've been together ever since. So we're I think it's like 40 years or something, isn't it? It's a long time. Anyway, we're still more or less working together, and obviously still a couple. And this is what we came up with. And Escape, I think, as you said, was something that I don't know, did you get to see Escape? I don't know whether you ever saw it when it came out. Did you see any issues of this magazine when it was being published in the 80s? Or was it too old? Maybe it's too old for you.
No,
do you remember it?
Not really, no.
No.
I don't think I'm familiar with it at all.
No, because we had, look at this, on issue 4, bottom right, I got to interview Javier Mariscal, the amazing Mariscal. And to be honest with this, Escape was very inspired by Raw, clearly. I mean, Raw was another one of those wake-up moments where you go, oh my gosh, comics can be like this. And I thought I knew European comics a bit, but of course, Spiegelman and Mooley had put together an extraordinary, selected, curated, beautiful art magazine, which was just a whole new statement of what comics could be like in the 80s. It was one of those moments where, okay, comics can be different again. And yeah, getting a chance to interview Mariscal. He had an exhibition in Paris, and it was delightful to meet, actually. And he told me that he doesn't do any drawing. He just has all these children that he meets on the beach, and they come into the studio and they do all the drawing for him. Which was not true, but anyway. And the format of the magazine, actually, this is showing the front and back covers because it was A5. It was, of course, the same size as a lot of the small press zines that many of the artists came from, the fast fiction scene. But this was kind of elevating that production. It was Peter, with all of his expertise working in magazines. He used to work at Harper's and Queen magazine, which was a very classy, society, fashion, glossy magazine, very, very big one. And so he brought all that expertise to a fanzine, essentially, a self-published zine, which then combined with my expertise, and we were able to really make something I think that hadn't really been seen in the UK before, and certainly had a very eclectic and very European perspective. We wanted to bring in much more from across the channel. Yeah, and so the magazine went for 7 issues in this format. The first 4 issues were hand separated by Peter. Then with issue 6 and 7, you can see here, we went to full color printing. Whoa. So painted covers. You should be impressed. I'm impressed by what Peter did with just 4 color separations. That's quite a talent to be able to do that in old school production, all pre-digital, of course. And then we did another 10 issues at a larger size with a new logo, which Peter also designed. Peter came up with a name, by the way, for magazine Escape as well. And this is where at last we could actually properly include European comics. You can see we had a special issue on Spain then, that was number 9, España, which was a great one. And we had Munoz and Sampaio there, we had Matotti, we had Burns, of course, as well. And with issue 10, we found a partner, basically a publishing partner in Titan Books, who had never done magazines, but they were very interested. At that time, it was just a little window when European comics were coming into English in quite a strong way in the mid-80s or so. There was, in fact, I've just written a big article, essay about the whole challenge of getting French or European comics, but French comics leading the way, of course, into English, and how difficult that's been. There's been quite a lot of resistance to it, but there were many breakthroughs. Raw definitely was one of those breakthrough moments. And with this new format, we could then run European comics. We ran Tardi, we ran Munoz and Sampaio, we ran Matotti, Baudouin, many others, full size. It was basically a proper size magazine. It wasn't a small.
Yeah, because when you talk about European comics, the main reference was France, right?
Yeah, I guess. But I mean, but of course, there was also awareness that many other comic cultures existed. Of course, quite a few names from, say, Spain or Italy were making it big in France. France was undoubtedly that France and Belgium were the big driving force. They had by far the biggest sales, the biggest impetus, but clearly so much was happening in other countries too. We were looking at them. We were looking at El Vibra. We looked at Alta Alta in Italy. Just that time in the 80s was a magazine decade. And I remember being in Barcelona for one of the comic salons, and there were so many new magazines coming out. There was Rambla. Do you remember Rambla? Which didn't last many issues. Magazines were the thing. It was a time when the graphic novel was around, but it was the whole thing of getting anthologies out. I just love that format, still do. I mean, it's not really a commercial format. It died out basically in the 90s, certainly in France and many elsewhere.
At this point, you were not really very interested in American comics.
Oh no, I love that too. Well, certainly, I mean, we'd had everyone from Burns to Ted McKeever. That's Steve Bissett on the cover there. The horror cover. So yeah, there was clearly. I don't really have any prejudice. It's just I think they do rather dominate things, has to be said, and they've been very good. They've just been more proactive, basically, and more successful in disseminating from the very beginning. Certainly from the early 20th century, their newspaper strips and comic books have been everywhere, pretty much. There's almost everywhere, and that hasn't been happening as much until recently with other cultures. So there's been an imbalance in how we see the world of comics. Yeah, that's all. So anyway, that's Escape. And then, this is when I got into curating. I mean, I really hadn't done much curating, I don't think, before this. I'm trying to think where we are now. Well, of course I did. This is going to go on too long. I just want to warn you, I think we should speed up because my life story is so ridiculously complicated to explain. And I've done too much, I think. But but in 1990, because of going to Angoulême many times, I got the chance to curate an exhibition on British comics for Angoulême, and that very much led to me getting a taste for curating, essentially. And when this opportunity came up to join the Cartoon Art Trust, this is their newsletter, which I put together for them in '92, I jumped at the chance to actually, was it '92? I think it was, yeah. Maybe, I think it was. Anyway, that's when I started to work with this charity, which based in London, that was trying to set up a national museum of cartoon art. And it was very much focused initially on the cartoon, meaning the single political cartoon, the gag cartoon, not comics. Comics were almost like an afterthought or almost really not on the agenda. But of course, they knew when I was coming in to be their project director that they were going to have comics, but we've got to include them. Okay, we're going to have them in balance, but we're going to have them. And over the years of working with them through the 90s, I was able to introduce or collaborate with other people, cooperate to make quite a few interesting exhibitions happen. We had major solo shows, we had artists spotlights, we had magazine spotlights, thematic shows. And then as you can see, actually towards the end, we had a big anniversary exhibition for Peanuts. That was in 2000, of course, when that was 50 years. And the gallery is still going. That became the Cartoon Museum, or actually is still going in London. I left in 2001, and shortly after they were able to put through what was going to be, we were working on a big lottery funding application, which they were able to get through and find a fantastic premises for, and they've kept going. In fact, they've just got some more money to keep them going. So all power to them. They have a collection of original artwork, and it was a great experience. It also was a great learning experience for me to deal with the public, to deal with artwork, artists, promotion, curating, the whole many, and working with many great people, and working with volunteers, making an institution work for the public. It was a tremendous experience. Yeah. Well, this is just a little insight about Dennis the Menace, because we had an exhibition we did in 2001. This is the British Dennis the Menace, of course, not the American Hank Ketchum one. So there we go. And then, look, the next thing is Comica. Is this okay? Do you want to ask me a question? Because we could be here all night.
No, you can go ahead, and explain. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned Comica in the intro, Jose. I mean, to be honest with you, Comica hasn't really officially stopped because the name is still being used for a few competition things. We're still doing a competition with the Observer and Jonathan Cape, finding new talent every year. But Comica was essentially from around 2003 to 2017, so it was about 14, 15 years or so. It was a really energizing festival for London and the UK, and with, of course, again, an agenda of pushing comics forward, of putting them into prestige venues, the ICA itself here, as you could see, also the V&A, the Victoria and Albert Museum, and really trying to cross over. So one of the ideas was to have people which you wouldn't expect meeting each other. So you'd have a big name like Art Spiegelman, but he would be talking to Philip Pullman, as in his Dark Materials. Or you'd have one of the most unsuccessful interviews I ever did was as part of Comica, I organized it, was to have Chris Ware in conversation, actually, I think in the first year, with Alex Garland, who's the guy that wrote The Beach. He's a great novelist, of course, but I hadn't realized that they were both incredibly shy on stage. And it was just, I thought, oh my gosh, what have I done? And I had to kind of, so it worked out in the end, but it's one of those things where you go, I hadn't realized how difficult these things could be. But those kinds of encounters between people, not just, and also of course having artists talking to each other, made the interviews very rich. This was the first year, 2003, basically the concourse gallery, essentially it's done a corridor, but we had this fun thing where Tom Gold actually was one of the artists who I know is interviewed here at the conference. He came up with a central spine on this POCOM, essentially it's a kind of UBAPO inspired project. It reads from right to left. That's because of the direction that people come in the ICA to read it. And you can see them just about in the middle there. There's the spine of the storyline, and other stories spin off from it. And amongst them, there's work there by Chris Ware and Roger Langridge and many other people. And it was a fun experimental collaborative thing which we put on the gallery wall. And considering it was only the first year, thanks to Spain again, to Semana Negra, I think it was Semana Negra, because that year, in 2003, they invited Charles Burns and Joe Sacco amongst their guests. There was a big spotlight on Fantagraphics. And through Ana Marino, who I was in touch with, said, well, look, we're bringing them over. Why don't you just bring them over to London from Madrid? It's much cheaper than bringing them all the way from America. We had no budget to do it, really. And so for our first year, we had Charles Burns, and Chris Ware, Charles Burns as well, and Joe Sacco for our first guests.
All right.
Incredible. And we also had Sophie Crumb's daughter, and Frederic Boilet from France via Japan. So, and it was just meant to be a one-off. The ICA, in fact, was closed at this time. They were a building site. They weren't going to do anything over this month or so when they gave us this week or 10 days. So that's why we got it, because otherwise they would have just been shut, and there was building going on while the festival was happening. Even so, we got a huge publicity. We got news coverage on the TV, especially with Joe Sacco, of course. And what was wonderful, the director said, I think this is worked, we'll do it again. And I can tell you the director of the ICA, Philip Todd, was extremely hard to convince, not at all convinced that comics belonged really in the ICA at all, but we convinced him. I mean, and John Dunning, who was the inside man there, who became a very close friend of mine, a great comic writer as well, and co-curator. So yeah, let's speed up a bit. So that was Comica, that's how it began. And then by the 10th year, well, in fact, we'd moved to different premises, and you can see there the 10th festival. We moved to Central St. Martin's, fantastic art college, amazing new venue up in the King's Cross, the whole new development area. We also collaborated, bottom left, bottom two images, we collaborated with Foyles Bookshop, the biggest and the most important bookshops in London, who gave us venue space in their new shop. As you can see there, there's Junko Mizuno being interviewed, and also through them, and we commissioned a whole bunch of comic artists to make a comic strip on as hoardings across the front of the shop when it was all being refurbished and modernized, to kind of tell the history of Foyles Bookshop. So that was a very fun thing that was done back in 2013. And yet we still are going with the competitions things. So yeah, that's that. Well, I should pause, I think. These are the books, the first 2 books I've done. So at least, I think the first 2 at least came out in Spanish, I believe. I believe they did. Did graphic novels come out in Spanish? I think it did.
It is, just as it is. As an addition,
yeah, some of your books are in Spanish.
Yeah, not all of them. I think the British one was a bit, that was when we loved making that book, the Great British Comics book, but it's a very specialized area, and it isn't as easy to sell as certainly manga. Manga's been by far the biggest selling book I've done, and still is, in fact, in many ways. But the great thing working with Peter on the design of this is that it's a test of any relationship to actually work closely with someone you're close to and make a book together. And I can tell you, I'm not easy to work with because I always want to get too much in, and I've always got my own ideas about how things will work. But we did make it work, and I think he did so much with the graphic design. The design of these books was all 3 of them were absolutely beautiful, and yeah, they were.
What is amazing is that you've been doing so much work. You've been like organizing exhibitions.
Yeah.
You've been like writing all these books at the same time.
More or less. Yeah. Sometimes there are peaks and troughs of when I'm busy or not busy, and they're all essentially a part work as I see them. All these different books are a kind of a big. They're a shelf, hopefully eventually, but certainly there's about maybe a dozen or so books, 10 or 12 books, something like that now. There's still more I want to do, but they're all gradually building up into this bigger perspective, I'm hoping, on what comics are, in my opinion, and my ideas about them. And there are still more things I want to do. And every step along the way is building that.
This is part as your presentation is called, of this lifetime fascination with comics that you have, right?
Yeah. Well, we're all getting older every day, and a lot of people. I was always sad when my friends at school, for example, I used to bring in new comics, and they'd look at the adverts. They'd look, you can get a nuclear submarine for $1. I said no, I brought in all the Jack Kirby Fourth World comics when they were coming out, because I was just as I say, blown away by seeing Kirby unleashed, and they couldn't see what I was seeing. I would show them these double-page spreads. They go, "Oh yes," and they wouldn't look at that. I had one friend, one very special friend, who did get comics completely, and in fact, I inherited some of his collection. It's very sad he died much too young, but we used to haunt the newsagents. There were comic shops, but everything you got mostly was just in the regular newsagent, and you never knew what one shop would get because it was always different. There'd be a different mix of stuff coming in. And for me, a highlight of the month was I would know when the new bundle of American comics brought over as ballast would arrive, and they would literally come on a ship. They'd be wrapped up in string, tied up. They'd be, and I would be there in the shop, and the guy would cut the string for me, so I could see them just as they come off the boat, and I would get first look because he knew I would buy one of almost everything, basically.
It was really exhilarating for you.
So this was on my lunch break. I wasn't meant to leave school, but I would go out to school on lunch break to this one newsagent that I knew was reliably getting the comics in, and I would get them. Yeah. Obsessive, just a bit. It's
a love story.
We all did that, really. Yeah. Okay, so we jumped to forward. That was that. Yes, I think, was that the right place for that? Well, yeah, I'm not going through every single book, I don't think, here, are we? But this was 2010. This was another thing I'm very interested in is where comics can go when they're put into the gallery, not just sticking them under glass and on the wall. That is, to me, slightly stifles comics. I think if they're, much as you want to appreciate the artwork, they also meant to be something that is very engaging, I think, and comes off the page and out of the frame or the vitrine. So doing this show, this was a really tremendous opportunity to work in a beautiful, unusual gallery with 4 floors, and each floor could be devoted to a different artist, making his or her, actually they're all male, I'm afraid, sorry about this. That's right, yes, but all 4 artists could make a comic that worked in that space and used the space and even the very location. We were in a park, and this is the particular one that was done by Dave McKean. And I'm sorry, there's too much to talk about in this, because a curator a lot of the time isn't really doing any more than just facilitating and allowing an artist like McKean to go, okay, just do what you want, basically, and providing them with all the support they need. But Dave is an artist, the other artists too, who you just say, make something, and you explain all the parameters, and then he comes up with this, which is just an extraordinary use of comics in a way I'd never seen before. It comes out of the whole multi-path, multi-cursal idea, the hypercomic, which goes back to that ICA, that Tom Gold thing I showed you with all the different interweaving things. This was meant to be for artists telling stories that can be read from multiple perspectives. It might be only 2 or 3. In this case, it was 3 different perspectives of the same incident from 3 different perspectives. An attack in a park, so the galleries in the park, so the setting was the park you were in, and it's the viewpoint of the attacker, the victim, and the witness, and how they remember it and how they misremember it. And it was based partly, I think, on something that McKean, it's not quite clear which of those 3 he was, victim, attacker, or witness, but was something quite close to him, quite personal. And using the gallery to divide the story into 3 narratives, to hide things, to use things on the windows you make out just there at the background. And this was this brilliant idea of having I always like explaining this. This is a bizarre sculpture which turned up. I didn't know this was coming in, of course. I mean, David just turns up with these things. You go, oh yes, we've got room for that. And this was where, if you positioned yourself, you can see in the background there was a mask with antlers, this theme of the antlered, because it was a deer park. Battersea Park was previously, is it Cuervos? Is that the word, deer?
Deer,
deer, yeah. So he used that, and that's why it's called the rut, because rutting is what stags do, and they bang horns together, and it's very much a macho, male dominance thing, which is what this attack was all about, essentially. But anyway, you are behind this antlered mask, and then as you look through, these broken up bits of text come into focus, and you can read them. And of course, that then takes you inside the head of each of the 3 masks of the 3 characters as they remember what happened. So a very clever use of that. I'm not quite sure that's used, that kind of broken up effect. Anyway, so that was just one amazing opportunity that resulted in we were Exhibition of the Week in Time Out magazine, and got tons of visitors, spent ages on all 4 floors, and the other 3 artists were also doing amazing stuff. And the gallery people were saying they're not used to people staying so long, and actually, they were reading the walls because they wanted to read the stories. And I thought that was really effective. Yeah. So I do talk far too much. It's one of my worst. I've
not at all.
Never been interviewed.
I was going to say that. I mean, this is like going maybe beyond comics, because it's like, I don't know, in the border between comics and art, Yeah.
I mean, what was fortunate is that when the opportunity comes up, the galleries are open, they're receptive, they know something's going on in comics, they just don't quite know how best to make it work in a gallery space. And this was a particularly interesting one, which I would love to be able to do more with, because it wasn't just, as I said, artwork on a wall like this. It's actually using the space as a physical parameter, physical inspiration for the artists. So, yeah.
You're moving from, like experimental comics, and art, avant-garde art and so on, between that world and 1001 comics you must read before you die.
This one I had to thank Matt Madden, who you may know is a very, very good comic artist. He did the exercises in style and 99 ways to tell a comic in different styles. Really brilliant American artist. He got this gig, and he just couldn't do it because he was working with his wife Jessica Abel on their wonderful book about how to make comics called Drawing Words and Writing Pictures. And he thought of me as someone that might be able to do it. And I was not sure I wanted to take this on necessarily. And it all came in an incredible last minute. I can remember being in Sao Paulo at a comics, was it Sao Paulo? No, it was Rio, I think it was Rio, at a comics festival. And it was just after the Frankfurt Book Fair. And suddenly my agent got back in touch and said, okay, they've actually said yes, but they need it all by the end of January. And that was October. And though we've only just done I've only just done a short list of maybe 200 that might be going in. But of course, these things have to happen quickly. It's all about co-editions. This is not just a small publishing job. This is a big book. And it has to come out in multiple languages for them to even start doing it. And to be honest with you, this is the only book I've done, I think that's fair to say, I think that was not a royalty payment thing. I'm not making a vast fortune for doing books, but I had to decide, is this worth doing? It was a good fee, but there was a lot of challenges to make it work. But it was a tremendously exciting thing. Once we got the criteria sorted out and the structure sorted out, which was chronological and definitely international. And I think nobody else probably, well, I'm saying nobody else, but I know other people have tried to do, there is, I think, another book called like 1,000 comics, to the best comics of all time or something like that, which I think there's only maybe a small number that are not American, basically. We love America. Well, mostly, but the fact is that America does dictate quite a lot. And of course, the American publisher of this book was saying, oh, we're not sure about having anything in this book that's not actually available in English. And I said, well, I think we just can't do a proper book if it's going to be only English language material. And I said, I know a number of things we can put in which have either been briefly translated or which are going to be, I'm sure, and in fact, many of them fortunately did end up coming into English. But also I put together a team of, having met so many people, of amazing advisors. I think it was Alphonse Molinet, who was the Spanish advisor, who's been a good friend of mine for many years. And then we had this enormous spreadsheet where everyone was just typing in, okay, what do you think? Should we put this one in? What do we put in? It was just a huge database kind of thing where everybody was consulted. And of course, everyone had to nominate stuff from their particular countries that they were expert in. We had about 70 people contributing from different traditions. There are still things countries we didn't include, of course. And but it's worked, I think, to stimulate and not just trot off the same old stuff all over and over and over. And when I meet people, what's lovely, some people I've met have actually, their copy has got lots and lots of post-it notes and ticks and things, and they're working on it. Before they die, they're going to try and read all 1,000. I haven't read all 1,001. I haven't read them all. No. And one exhibition idea I still want to do is I want to bring all the 1,001 comics into one place, into a gallery. Of course, the trouble is it's out of date now because it's nearly 10 years old now, this book. But just to have the physical thing of here they are all in one gallery would have been amazing. Maybe just printed things or reproductions, but it would have been a tremendous chronology to see how comics are developed.
How long did it take you to put together the?
Well, as I think I said, we only have basically about 4 months, I think.
Okay.
Which is, but fortunately, I was able to find lots of great people to write these quite short entries, only maybe 200 or 300 words, but that's pretty tough. You have to distill stuff down. And they did an amazing job of designing the book. This is the quartet, I think. We got Gillian.
And you asked Terry Gillian to write the foreword?
Yeah, that was pure luck through my friend John Dunning, who works in movies. And we knew Gillian was a big comics fan. Obviously, he worked on Help with Harvey Kurtzman, for example, and did comics in Pilote in France. So yeah, it was a good opportunity to have that extra name on the front of it, of course. Yeah, and it went with many languages. What you may not know, I mean, the Spanish edition is not really very good. How can I say this politely? But it's actually just a straight translation of the British edition. Now, all the other editions, because there were Italian ones, German ones, there was a Czech one, I forget other one anyway, were all localized a little bit, some quite a bit actually, because the whole point is that the texts in these 1,001s, you may not realize that none of these 1,001s stay the same from country to country. In theory, they don't anyway, because because if it's text only and there's no images, you can take that text out and drop something local in to replace it. As long as it fits in, of course, the chronology. And that's an extra challenge to make that work. But then I went on tours of places like well, I came to Spain. I came to I went to Prague, for example, promoting the local versions of it, which again got lots of interest because suddenly here was a gallery. Here was a book, I should say, that was bringing it all into focus. So yeah, and this is comics art that was done for Tate, which was again an amazing door opening there. It would have been an exhibition. There were plans for an exhibition at Tate. I'm still, one of my goals still is to have Tate, well, preferably Tate Modern, I think, do something substantial on comics. It's going to happen. I'm just hoping I'll stay alive long enough to see, if not actually do it. But we need something that really makes a strong statement about comics being an art in its own right and deserving of being presented in an original, strong way in a gallery setting, and just going, come on, what's been the problem? What's been your hang up for all these
Why be reticent?
centuries? Sorry?
Why be reticent about that? Hard.
Yeah. But there's all sorts of interest. I'm actually one of the projects I'm working on, which is I can't say yet because I haven't even got the contract yet, but is to do a new book about comics in a big art book series, not like this one. This is another Tate series, but and then because what happened apparently in the early 70s, there was talk of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. When they added their film department, there was some discussion, which I'm still researching, about having a comics department. There could have been one. And you sort of think, wait a minute, why didn't that happen? And why, if it doesn't happen then, why couldn't it happen now? It needs not just a show, which is over maybe in a few months, even if it tours or something. It needs, an institution to go, we believe this stuff's important and we haven't been collecting it. And of course, now it's incredibly expensive, quite a lot of it, but we need to recognize that this is actually an art form that we've been, we've failed to keep up, we've failed to respond to, and we need to start having a serious collection of it. In the meantime, of course, there are museums opening. George Lucas has got his museum opening, already online, I think. Is it visual narrative, some graphic narrative museum, which includes comics, of course, very substantially. And there are other museums, as you know, of comics, specialist ones. One in Angoulême is amazing. But I still think that an institutional opening within the art world has got to eventually happen.
I think we need in Madrid also an art museum, on comics,
Yeah, I know that you've had shows there. Like the ABC Museum did a nice show, and of course you've had the Crazy Cat exhibition. I came to Madrid. That's what I came to Madrid.
Right. Yeah, suppose last year, right?
Last weekend practically, and I spent the whole day there, and with my friend Woodrow Phoenix, who is a huge fan of Herriman, and we read every comic out loud to each other. We performed them, I'm afraid.
That was a great exhibition.
Tremendous. But a strange one, wasn't it? Because it seemed to be a little bit of a fluke that it happened. It seemed that the comics world, the world in Madrid, didn't necessarily all know about it happening. It wasn't quite joined up, it seemed to me a little bit. Am I wrong in that? Maybe you could.
Yeah, well, many people are not very knowledgeable about comics, and especially about that period,
Right.
And that might be the reason why,
Yeah. But of course, I mean, it was tremendously exciting that the show was in such a prestige space, and it made absolute sense to be there. There didn't need to be any justification for it. So that was, unmissable, I felt. Yeah, this is stuff that I did for TV, wearing a very silly bow tie. I wouldn't have chosen that. Peter thought I looked good if I wore a bow tie on television. I don't wear bow ties. Anyway, it's the Dandy, it's the Beano, it's British comics, and it was a TV show, 3-part series that they did quite well, except that it only really focused on a lot of nostalgia and weren't things good in the old days, they're not quite as good now. And it did end, of course, with Viz, which you may be aware of, it's still running. It's a very funny, very, very, very good modern humor comic, satirical adult comic, but it didn't really want to address the graphic novel or the new voices as much as I think it could have done. So it was okay. And for BBC to devote 3 hours of TV to comics was quite something. British comics very rarely get any attention. And then partly out of that, and other things, came the opportunity to do this show for the British Library. This was some years later. And this was all down to my friend John Harris Dunning. John Dunning is, as I say, he's the guy that helped me set up Comica at the ICA. He was working inside the ICA and managed, and the two of us persuaded them to do it. And then he was the one that just kept knocking on the door on the British Library and saying, look, you've got all these thousands of comics going back to many centuries, going back to the Middle Ages, for goodness sake. And you've never done anything with them. And they said, well, we've got nobody on staff, nobody specialist that knows really what these things are. Would you like to come in and curate and be sort of freelance curators? And this was an extraordinary opportunity. The working in the British Library meant, of course, that the book and printed matter was the priority in this. This wasn't an art show, it was a book show. But we still had a lot of fantastic original artwork on display. And what was exciting is they were completely receptive to doing things they'd never done before. Like, for instance, having a comic artist, Dave McKean, design the exhibition, conceive it. He conceived these wonderful kind of spiraling, giant comic strips essentially floating around on the ceiling, which had to be made in situ from some kind of polystyrene, a process that they'd never tried before. And then it had projectors on it, which were projecting different sequences or little short films and things. And then John Dunning had the brilliant brainwave of getting Jamie Hewlett on the left there to, as in Tank Girl, to design the poster. This is all, of course, around the time of guerrillas, etc., etc. And that just caused a huge sensation. We got vast publicity just for that. The British Library, I think, really didn't, they were bold in actually saying, we're going to do this. Because 2014, of course, was the anniversary of the Great War, World War I, and they would have been doing a big World War I show, and they boldly decided that they would just make that a smaller foyer free exhibition, and then use the big gallery to do this. And now that was just like, my gosh, what an extraordinary chance to work with these people, to this enormous collection. And yeah, I mean, to me, just you have to pinch yourself. Is this happening? And I know this is the kind of thing that can happen. The right time, the right people, the right, all the things, all the stars all align to make something extraordinary happen. And it happens, of course, it's happened to you, I'm sure to you, it happened in Spanish comics, these sudden moments where things crystallize and you can see the art form is getting the attention that it deserves. So yeah, tremendous. And the big plus for John and I, the most important thing for us was that we had a lot of freedom, surprising amount of freedom, to even include adult comics. We included a whole section on erotic comics, for example. And it was the first time they'd actually done a 16 plus exhibition. Otherwise, it wasn't for kids. And of course, that was the first thing we decided we must do. We don't want to just emphasize the juvenile. We didn't exclude it, but we put it in its place and wanted to go much more wide-ranging across history and across different genres and themes. And we really pushed the boat out to provoke, in fact, in many ways. Yeah. This is taking far too long. I mean, we should whiz, I think. Anyway, we haven't got to anything yet, really. We've just been talking about.
Yes, I mean, I think we need to speed up a little bit.
I think we do. You know? So anyway, this was a fantastic opportunity to work with the House Illustration, which is a superb new venue in London, open 2014. And the curator there, Olivia Ahmad, came to me saying, we want to do something on comics by women, and would you like to co-curate it? And I was honored to do that. And we brainstormed the idea that it would be 100, the subtitle was, as I say, 100 women making comics. And we'd show the books where possible alongside the artwork so people could look through them. And the most beautiful thing about it, it was quite international too, of course. I mean, it wasn't just British, by the way. But these artists, I think nearly all, Audrey Niffenegger is just there, but nearly all British. And a lot of them had never met before. And including quite a few older artists, there's no polite way of putting it, who had been slightly overlooked or sidelined. Nicola Lane, for example, is there, who really wasn't known about. We only just discovered her while we were doing Comics Unmasked, the British Library. So Comics Creatrix was one of those tremendous moments. And this gathering was just so strong and so exciting. And it wasn't separated. There was a whole movement going on at this time of women grouping together. Ladies Do Comics, for example, was starting just around a bit before this. There was an energy of new talent coming in, and talent that had been around for a long time, like Posey Simmons, who's in this picture as well, feeling that what they'd done was basically pave the way for generations of women artists, obviously not just in Britain, but internationally. So it was, yeah.
Feeling also that these people come together really, really with ease, and a tremendous ease. They will come together because they're doing the same thing, and they're sharing things in a very intense way at the same time.
Quite right, was absolutely right. Yeah, and this was also, of course, opened only a few months after the scandal at Angoulême, where they'd omitted a single woman from the list of nominations for the Grand Prix. And I think various people from the festival had put their foot in it, trying to explain why they'd done this. And there was all sorts of repercussions for that. It certainly got the most publicity Angoulême has probably had in many, many years, but not necessarily what they wanted. And of course, as a result of that, it also brought the whole question up of, well, what have women done for comics? You know, and we went right back to the 18th century, I think. Yes, the 18th century, and found very early women cartoonists and caricaturists to include in the historical section. So it wasn't all just living artists. It did trace quite a bit of the history as well. So yeah, tremendously exciting doing that. We was through a bit more of these ones. This is another British show that I did, very nice one, 2 years after the British Library in a local gallery. This was more nostalgia based, but still had lots of cutting edge artists in it as well. There's some of the images from that exhibition. That was great fun. And then we come to Mangasia. There wasn't a book for that one, by the way. This one, of course, Mangasia is the one that happened in 2017 and was really a challenging thing to bring together because once again, I had a team of advisors for both the book on the right, you can see there, and for the exhibition, which grew out of the book. This isn't what always happens, but the book came first, my first book for Thames and Hudson. And then the Barbican, who I'd been talking to quite separately, said, well, we're thinking of doing something on comics. Would you like to propose something? I just told them what I was researching. They said, that just sounds like the perfect subject for an exhibition, because this is not just to make a show in London in the Barbican Centre, which is the biggest arts centre actually in Europe. I've been told to say that, but it is actually very, very big, multi-arts venue, but also to tour. And that we were able to tour it initially to Italy and France. And then at the moment, unfortunately, it's waiting. We have several venues waiting. But this was based on Thames and Hudson asking me, well, could you do another book on manga? Because they knew, of course, how popular manga is. And I knew manga was a best-selling subject, but I didn't really just want to do another book, because that's by this time and all the time I've been researching comics from across Asia. I built up a lot more contacts and knowledge and just enthusiasm for all these other cultures, so that rather like America dominating comics, you know, Japan dominates Asian comics quite obviously, and quite rightly. It is extraordinary still. I mean, I'm still absolutely passionate about how wonderful manga is. It is just, I mean, I just got this is the new Atom, by the way, that's just come out, which is celebrating 30 years of comics of manga in France. And you just, it's just staggering what the Japanese are still doing. Anyway, so
didn't you get any contact to bring this exhibition to Spain?
I know Barbican's had some approaches, and I know, but nothing has actually come together. It's a very quite an expensive exhibition because you have to hire it from the Barbican. This is how Barbican basically makes the thing possible, and it needs at least 1,000 square meters. And it's not something that kind of go up for a weekend at a festival. It has to go into I mean, wonderful if you have got some suggestions or connections for it. But what was tremendous is that when the show opened in Rome, that you can see there was advertising, there was on the tube, this is the metro in Rome. This is the venue. I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's like something out of Little Nemo in Slumberland, isn't it? I mean, just incredible. It's a palace of exhibitions from the 19th century. And you have to go. This is unbelievable, really. So a very dramatic exhibition space. This was the space it went to when it traveled to Milan. This is a royal palace, Villa Reale in Monza, where the Grand Prix is raced. And then in Nantes, it went to this beautiful building, which was actually the former biscuit factory for Petit Loup biscuits. So a very big, actually fantastic space, because these other venues were great, but they were lots of separate gallery spaces and rooms, and they were not. This was one enormous open industrial space that we could really use dramatically. And there's just a few images here, but again, extraordinary opportunities to work with Pentagram, who really are one of the all-time great graphic design studios, companies in the world. I mean, they just are outstanding. They did so many famous record covers and so much more. And they came up with lots of beautiful solutions using this hanging paper, beautiful textured types of paper. And of course, the exhibition is designed to be toured, so it has to be adaptable. It's in modules. It can be adapted to different spaces. And lots of original artwork, nearly 300 pages of original artwork, lots of fabulously rare comics, some from my collection, but a lot of them from collectors I've known around the world, and objects as well, sculptures. This is a sculpture by Takano Aya, who's part of the kind of super flat movement. I wanted that statue in the lobby of that palazzo. You know, it's just technically too difficult to do it. This is 6 meters high, as you can see. It would have been so wonderful to have had it there, but it didn't happen, unfortunately. And it included also, in our multimedia section, we did a lot of stuff about the influence of manga on not just obviously anime and movies and many other things, but also in art, but also fashion, for example, and other forms, video art. And we also worked with a top robot mecha designer from Japan. Pentagram worked with them to make this interactive video thing where if you stand in front of it, the robot will stand in the same position that you're in. And then if you strike a certain pose, it'll activate. Yeah, and that's, of course, it's a fun, you have to do these moments. You have to have Instagrammable moments, essentially, in exhibitions. I haven't done something quite like this before. This was very big scale, very big budget, and tremendous opportunity. And most important of all for me was to have all the support of these advisors, all the contacts that I've had and built up with artists from around Asia, and being able to go, look, we're going to show you a lot. It's not just going to be manga. The word Manga Asia is a tricky title. It was a name first developed actually by Nicolas Finet, who was a director for a time of Angoulême, and a great friend of mine, also written great books about, and also is an author of bande dessinée. And it was used as a section at Angoulême, the comics festival in France, to cover Japan plus other countries in Asia. And it was called Mangazi, basically. I always thought Manga Asia is a great word. But of course, when you start talking to people, say, from other countries than Japan, it sounds like manga is swallowing Asia. And if you're trying to portray, this is why the subtitle, Wonderlands of Asian Comics, was vital. The exhibition had to have the full title. Otherwise, it sounds like it isn't just the history of manga. It's manga obviously having a huge influence on Asia, but also looking at contrasting localized national traditions, which often have nothing to do with manga, certainly not historically. Anyway, they may be much more influenced, like the Philippines, influenced by American comics far more than manga. But of course, countries that have been occupied have got a lot of connections, not always comfortable ones, often quite traumatic, difficult ones. So it's a big, complicated subject, which nobody in their right mind would have tried to put a book together about, or an exhibition, because it's extremely complicated. But essentially, what I wanted to do was manga is the Trojan horse here. And we had to admit, you can't sell an exhibition that's just about Asian comics. You have to call it Manga plus Asia, because the audience is developed already for manga. There is still developing slowly an audience for comics from elsewhere in Asia. And so that was the goal, to open up vistas of Asian comics beyond manga. Yeah. Okay. I'm no idea what time. How are we doing? We're doing all right. Yeah. We haven't got very far yet. This is something I'm also very lucky to be invited to this festival in Busan. Yes, in just over the way from Japan, actually. I went to their first festival in 2017. I think it was their
South
first.
Korea? Is that
South Korea, yes, exactly. This looks a bit more impressive than it actually is. It is not an entire centre devoted to webtoons. It looks enormous, of course. It's actually only part of it. But even so, they've got studio spaces that people can apply for residences to work on webtoons. The webtoon format, the vertical webtoon format, as you may know, is phenomenal in Korea. I mean, in South Korea. And it's so strange that you can have a country where a cultural comics, the previous cultural comics, manhwa, was dying out and was actually really despised by many, in society or in the government, whatever. They'd even have live comic book burnings on a national holiday for family values because they felt that comics were associated with violence and drugs and they were a bad thing. This went on at least in the 80s, maybe into the 90s. And it's got to the point where people now are saying, oh, I don't read manhwa. No, I don't read manhwa. I read webtoons. Because that's, they literally had to reinvent. The new name was made in the same way the graphic novel in some ways is doing that up to a point. But in Korea, it's definitely changed things. There's a definite difference between manhwa and webtoon. And what they've done is, of course, they've got the phones, they've got the portals, the big money places that people go to, which we don't really have. I mean, maybe we have Google, I guess, but things like that. But these are portals that are want content that you'll find only there. And there are, well, we can see here, there are many artists. I mean, there's nearly 6,000 Koreans working on webtoons. Including system, and then the numbers. I mean, something like says here, I think nearly 3/4 of everybody in Korea is reading webtoons. I mean, and there's money because there's some of them are free. And if you want to read them or you want to read next week's episode, that's how they get you. Because if you can wait, it'll be free, but you can't wait, can you? So they know that you're going to pay. So that was tremendously exciting, and it's the kind of development in comics that you can't predict and possibly you can't repeat. I'm not sure yet, but it's certainly one of the features of comics, the digital form, that has certainly taken off and taken hold in Korea and made room for extraordinary comics that speak about important stuff. They're not just fun, they are actually addressing tough questions of, corruption, whether it's corporate or political. I mean, Korea's gone through no end of traumas, as you may know, and it's a space sometimes that's more free to speak out certainly than the mainstream news media. So yeah, an amazing experience. This was an exhibition that I did for them in 2018, Global Webtoons, not just looking at Korean material, but looking at other innovations. Interestingly, the touch point here, the spark, this all taking off, of course, was Scott Mccloud with his reinventing comics, which is where he envisaged these digital forms of comics. And though it's not coming out quite the way he expected, he'll admit that. I mean, that was published in Korean and it had an impact. It was taught, it was used in art schools. It spread the idea that this could take off. So that was fun, tremendous fun to do. And we had lots of screens to look at, iPads and things to look at, and different examples of. And what was the most interesting to me about this was that I was asked to show, obviously, quite interesting, experimental, unusual digital comics. But being there, I kind of realized that the Koreans were interested, the public and the profession, but they weren't that interested, because in the end, they knew the fundamental thing, which is that it's not a gimmick. You don't need to have bells and whistles and 3D or whatever it might be. Good though those things could be, and they still could be, because they've got to keep delivering. Every week there has to be a new episode. And that episode is just another webisode, another webtoon that scrolls by at extraordinary speed. I mean, these people, it's just like, I saw people reading that. And they're just about reading the text. And maybe they registered the images. And it's not something that they're not, which is a shame, of course, because they're not actually, that cuts off, in other words, some opportunity for people to go, oh, there's a surprise here, or I'm not reading vertically, now I'm reading horizontally, or now there's a whole different character. It's all very, very linear. Yeah. And in some ways, some of my misgivings here is that we are at a point where both web comics generally often tend to be just newspaper strip, Webtoons are a long vertical strip. It's one panel at a time, and we've literally stripped back the medium to its barest minimal essential of one panel followed by another. And as we all know, comics are a good deal more than that. So that's just for reflection, I think. Yeah. But then you saw me earlier with these, well, we know that basically VR and AR is only really going to take off when people can wear comfortable headsets. Until they make something that doesn't weigh a ton and squeezes your brain. But anyway, the alternative to those headsets, of course, is to use your smartphone. And with this AR example by the French artist Marc-Antoine Mathieu, maybe you've seen that he's done some really clever developments of AR, elements of his book Sens coming to life and stepping out of the book in front of your eyes. It's good, it works in the context of the story, but I'm still waiting for it to be more developed, whether this is going to be something that is a real big new trail to be blazed, or whether it's just something that's this year's gimmick. I don't know yet. We have to see. Have you seen any AR or VR type comics that have made you go, oh, this points a way forward? I don't know whether anything struck you from what you've seen.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I'm looking all the time for what's happening. I'm very open because I believe this is an opportunity. It's quite obvious. The basic factor is many of us are still doing this. But a lot of people don't do that anymore. I'm sorry, they're not doing it. It's all got to be on the phone, hasn't it? Yeah. And I don't really love my phone very much. No, I don't. I turn it off rather a lot. Yeah. I'm a bit old-fashioned, and I'm not very convinced that. But I just think we have to maybe move with these times, and people's attention span now is the phone and not the book, increasingly.
But just to replace the printed page, thank God, is not easy. No. And that is going to, hopefully, is going to stay for long.
Yeah, I mean, there's been some talk, hasn't there, of electronic paper, which we've yet to see. The fact you could have one sheet and the entire book would be on this one sheet, or maybe both sides of it or something. I'm sure something like that's been worked on, but we've yet to get to that. But as we know, we're all reading digitally anyway. I'm just wrapping up a bit, I think, here. This was this extraordinary exhibition we had here in London. Probably once in a lifetime, certainly even in the UK, maybe in the world, but a tremendous statement that the British Museum is putting on this show, getting a huge audience and media interest. They have a serious collection of manga, not just in the last few years. It goes right back, of course, to Hokusai and to the 19th century. Since they were founded, they've been collecting Japanese art and Japanese narrative art along the way. Tremendous. The interesting factor about this is that this was an extraordinary collaboration between, I think, maybe at least 4, if not 5, certainly people like Shueisha, Shogakukan, Hakusensha, and Kodansha, and maybe one other one, who are rival publishers, who don't work together. They just don't do things. They don't. You go and see a Shonen Jump exhibition, or you go and see a Naruto exhibition, or you go and see a whatever, but you don't tend to see them working together. Unfortunately, an organization was specially created to make this exhibition possible, so that the publishers would work together and would cooperate and allow their different material to be shown alongside each other. It may not be the first, but certainly it's an important step to represent. They hadn't understood this is what needs to be done. You've got to, for the international world, you've got to see a perspective of manga and not just one character or one artist or something. And really well done. I wasn't a curator on this at all. I was only involved in some events and giving them some contacts, etc. But it was a really inspiring exhibition.
Were you involved in the organization of this exhibition?
No, as I say, I wasn't involved curatorially, but I've known the curator Nikon Romania for many years. Okay. Gave her advice and connections, and did some events with them as well. Tremendous. She did a tremendous job, and it was the whole Japanese department was involved. Now they do have the expertise there. They've actually been doing several exhibitions, not as big as this, for several years now. So at least maybe 5 to 10 years they've been doing different shows. So it was building up to this. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh yeah, this is the book I did 2 years ago. No, a year ago, last year. Yeah. Which I mean, Posey Simmons is an artist we are so lucky to have. We really are. She's, but not every country has got someone quite as special as Posey Simmons working, whether male or female, because she just brings so many sensibilities to her work, which we need in comics desperately, which includes actually a certain amount of wit and wisdom and maturity that you don't always get when you're older either, quite honestly. But it's not an ageist thing. She just brings a lot of ideas and sensibility to the page, to what she does.
Yeah, I had a sense that it was something new. It was closer, a kind of a hybrid thing between a comic and a literary work. That is, it reads like as a novel. It's got something novelistic in the style she writes, in the way that she chooses the images and the text, and the typography that she uses as well. It's very something unexplored. And I don't know.
I agree with you, Jose. Yeah, I do agree with you. I think because there is this idea that we don't like reading. I mean, and there's always this cliche that, oh yes, comics are a visual medium, and they are driven by pictures, all this kind of stuff, and they're like a storyboard or whatever these ideas are. And text is usually meant to be kept quite short. I mean, people like, I think Dave Sim has put chunks of text in occasionally, for example, in Cerebus. There are examples of people using it, but sometimes slightly, cumbersome way. It kind of jars. And obviously, text can be used graphically. Someone like Eisner obviously uses all kinds of typefaces and typographic elements and physical documents and things like this in it. But with Posey, you have got typesetting. You've got the typesetting you'd find in a novel, or of course in a newspaper. And it's not unconnected that what she's doing here is she is essentially thinking of the page of the graphic novel almost like a newspaper, because she comes from that background and she knows that a certain amount of text can be read by people at the same time as looking at pictures. So it's almost come from that newspaper training, if you like. But it does open up all sorts of questions as to the writing that's put into comics. The fact that maybe there's no reason to feel that you can't write more than you would have normally thought you should. It also throws up questions of whether you're repeating what you can see or whether you're actually supplementing what you see. I mean, you don't have to say the man walked in the room and show the man walking in the room, but you could say, a terrible odor of whatever came in as he entered. Things you can't necessarily, but you can't necessarily draw so easily. Well, you could draw that, of course. You could draw some waftaroms, those special lines that show scent, but it could be a very nice scent, of course. But I mean, the point is, you could have textual elements that do the stuff that text can do. I mean,
and as you say in the book, the observation of power is incredible. She's just give us like the whole evolution of British society through her pages, through her different.
Yeah. Well, she's an extraordinary observer. I mean, the one thing that really stands out is that she has such memory, such focus, and attention to what's going on around her. And especially in her most recent book, Tamara Drew, that is one of the strongest stories about London and its enormous divides of rich and poor and prejudice towards immigrants, etc. That is not just in comics, but in any medium, in my opinion. Yeah. So yeah, fantastic opportunity. It was wonderful to do this, because I've, having done these enormous surveys and to work with a book about one artist who I personally admire enormously, and also we get on very well. We have a laugh all the time, and she is such a creative force. And there hasn't been a book about her. You sort of think, well, how is that possible? There hasn't been a book about her before. So it was, and a very nice project. The French edition actually is nicer. I shouldn't say. It's much nicer than the English one. It's bigger. It's got a lovely dust jacket, of course, you can see here, and it's on nicer paper, to be honest with you as well. So I would recommend, if you read the French, get the French one. But of course, it's the same contents. But and then amazingly, this all coincided. Of course, it was planned for me to curate exhibitions for Posey, her first major one in the UK and her first major one in France when these books came out. So it was a lovely bit of synergy that doesn't always happen. Yeah. So yeah, right. And then this is just touching on some of the stuff I'm doing now. Obviously, I'm still developing some new things, but I love this. Have you seen this drawing before? Isn't it a lovely drawing? By, do you know Roland Topor? He was in the Panic group, wasn't he, with Jodorowsky and I think other people anyway. But I love you have this he looks a bit like Alan Moore in a way, doesn't he, in a top hat, but he's very pompously pointing out a panel. If you look more closely, you'll see that the panels are full of people being killed.
In different ways?
In different ways, yes.
Does it have a hint of Punch in it? And the kind of style reminds me of Punch.
It's top part has got this kind of engraved, super rendered, sort of slightly Victorian look to it. Yes, you're right, it has. I mean, I know how familiar you are with Toppo. He's done a few comics. He's more a cartoonist, but his comics used to appear in Charlie Monsieur and other places, and he's just an absolute genius. Yeah, so I'm doing some guest lecturing. I've yet to take this step, and I have many friends who do teach. People like Roger Sabin, of course, here in the UK, and Simon Grennan and others, and the new Masters in Comic Studies that's being started by Frederick Collert. But I step back from teaching partly because I'm quite independent and I'm quite maverick is the English word, if you know the word. And I want to keep options open. And I don't be too tied down. And I'm very happy I love meeting students. I'm meeting some great new artists who are working on graphic novels now on this Leeds course. Tremendously exciting, all kinds of backgrounds, all kinds of ambitions. So it's nice to give them feedback and probably show them material that maybe hopefully will inspire them, give them some encouragement. Yeah. And I'm ending, this is just a few things we're going to wrap up with here, just a few things that I think are lovely and you might not know about, but this is a facsimile edition of Screw Style Nijishiki by Suga Yoshiharu, which is of course one of the landmark comics in all comics. I mean, not just manga, it's one of those extraordinary moments in comics. And this was done as a special edition, reproducing the artwork same size and super accurately in a box. And I think the edition, I should know, shouldn't I? It's just over here, but I can't get it to it very easily, was something like 81 or something. It was meant to be meant to be his age, I think. And it was meant to be published around his birthday, I think. Anyway, the point is it was very hard to get, and you couldn't order it, basically, unless you were in Japan, paying in yen, had a Japanese bank account, Japanese address, everything to stop you getting it if you weren't in Japan. But it's sold out now, but it's a beautiful object. I got it partly because at the time, I bought it partly was maybe because there was talk about doing a Tsuge exhibition. As you know, of course, Angoulême did one this year. Isn't that right? I think, yes, this year. But at the time, there was other festivals were looking at how do we do this? I thought, well, look, if we can't show anything, we could maybe at least, if we get these reproductions, they would at least be enabled us to show some reproductions of the actual artwork. And it is special. I always think it's special to see the artwork in its real form, in its full scale. It really, something special comes from that. There's an aura to it, even in facsimile, to be honest with you, I think. So there we are. That's a nice object. And I think it's tremendous, of course, that this year Tsuge came to Angoulême, got a special Grand Prix prize for his work. And there's an amazing exhibition and catalogue. I mean, Stéphane Beaujean, I have just the highest admiration for what he's been able to achieve during his tenure as the director of the festival. It's put it onto a whole higher level, especially, of course, bringing in so many more artists from Japan. Yeah, that's that. Okay, and then another artist I'm very keen on is Shintaro Kago Shintaro, to be accurate. I've only just ordered this book. I'm aware of Kago's work. Are you aware of it? It's quite terrifying, actually, isn't it? Some of it really horrible.
I've seen some images, on internet.
Not safe for work. Not safe for work. Definitely not. It's pretty. He's completely out there. But I'm slightly more interested in not when he's just been doing the shock stuff. When he's doing these really playful, crazy ideas with comics. I've yet to really understand all this. This is what intrigues me about it. But there was a book in French of some of his more experimental pieces. And this one it's called Gutterville, where, in other words, all the story is happening obscured by the panels. It's happening in the gutters, in the space outside the frames. The frames themselves are left blank. And I'm not sure if it's just like a funny two-page or whether, in fact, he develops a reasoning and an argument, like a discussion between their lives being obscured by these white cubes and white squares. But he's done some very interesting experimental comics. And as that clearly is one of the areas that can surprise, the conceptual comics that people like Ilan Manuash and others are doing. Artists like Francesc Ruiz, I think is his name, the Spanish artist who's done art shows using comics and conceptual and art gallery ways of really exciting. There's enough for a whole separate. This is the material that again would work very well, I think, in an art gallery context. And then I'm showing just a few things that I've bought because I don't really collect. Do you collect original artwork from comics? Do you have some?
Not really.
I have some old ones.
Sorry?
I've got some old, because in Spain back in the 70s and 60s, we got a lot of American ones, Alex Raymond and, and I've got some of those.
Have you? Wow.
The 60s and 70s.
Well, lucky to buy them before they were through the roof, because everything is just so extraordinarily expensive now, isn't it? You're seeing the auction prices things are going for. That's another thing that's, I mean, if nothing else convinced the art world, I mean, to show them, a Hergé tinting going for several million euros, that nothing else, money will might make them go, oh yes, maybe this is art after all. Yeah. So good. I mean, I've worked with, obviously I'm lucky to have had a chance to work with artwork for exhibitions, for example, but I bought a few pieces, very few pieces, and I've been lucky to be given things, but I've just started to explore a little bit more the byways, the kind of slightly overlooked areas of art. I'm very interested in Filipino comics. This is not just because of doing Mangasia, but for a long time, certainly at least since many of them, like Nestor Redondo and Alex Nino and Alcala, worked in American comics, of course, in the 70s. I've loved the work. And some of it does show up, actually quite cheap, sometimes, if you're lucky. But this is one of these cultures where you go, this is just lost. There's a museum. The late and wonderful Jerry Alanguilan, of course, established a comics museum, KOMIKS, in Manila, I think just outside Manila, I think, in the Philippines. There's been exhibitions, they have amazing artists, but it's still a struggle for this culture to get accepted, and also for a lot of this work to find any kind of reprinting. These are long, narratives, amazing graphic novels that have never been compiled into book form, even though while they were being serialized in these big selling, I think mostly weekly, I think certainly regular magazines, anthology magazines, the films would come out. The films would be beyond the screen. These are local Filipino films, and in fact, I think they even timed it sometimes so that you'd have to go to the film to see how the story ended, because there was the whole thing. We're going to keep now. It's on the screen now. Go and see it, and it was all coordinated. It was, forget Hollywood and Marvel Cinematic Universe. This is the Philippines in the 60s and 70s, just 80s, just making the whole movie comics synergy come alive in extraordinary ways. But nobody seems to have thought at the time, oh, maybe people would like to read the whole story that this film is based on in a book. As far as I know, that just wasn't really done. And so much of it is languishing. Sadly, there are a lot of, even the printed comics are hard to find. There's nothing, there is, I'm sure some archiving, certainly collectors, as always, it's collectors, mad people like us that look after this material when institutions often don't. They just dismiss it. So anyway, that's just a lovely page, an example I managed to find of a page of artwork from the Philippines. And then
Paul, we probably need to speed up a little bit,
We do. We're near the end, aren't we, I think? Yeah.
Yeah, and summarize the rest of the conference.
Okay, I'm not going to stay too long. No. This is some Mexican artwork which I managed to pick up for not too much. And nice pirate comic, very much Alex Raymond influence, I think, here. And based, in fact, on I think Captain Blood is a Sabatini pirate novel. I think Raphael Sabatini is the originally it's swashbuckling. It's got a swashbuckle pirate stuff. And then I've got this with me here as well. But this is this volume when I was in Mexico City 3 years ago. It was very hard to find old Mexican comics in bookshops. Just really hard to find. And my friend and I, we found one bookshop appropriately called Librerio. I shouldn't tell you what the name is because they all go to it now, but Librerio Labyrinthio. like a labyrinth, like Borges, basically.
Laberinto.
Yes, Laberinto. And they when you asked, they had nothing on show, and they said, "Do you have any comments?" Well, and they would gradually, a few things would come up from under the. We've got these. Have you got any more? Well, we've got this. Gradually, more stuff, and then actually we've got more stuff, but it's up on a kind of mezzanine, raised floor, which you can't really get to unless you climb up a ladder. So, I'll climb up a ladder. Give me a ladder. It's stuff that's left up there. So me and my friend, so we had to go up there, and we found stuff. And amongst the stuff we found these bound volumes. This is a beautiful object. I mean, I've got it actually here, where
a real collector's piece. Yeah.
These are not, of course, published. Right? They are hardback, lovingly collected. I should have bought all of them. I'm so regretting now. My friend bought one, I bought one. There were maybe about 10 of them. And what's amazing, if you think this is a lot of pages, this is only 11 issues of the daily Pépine magazine, which I think began sometime maybe in the 30s. I think it was something like that. And somebody obviously loved them and collected them and put them together into bound volumes. And this is the cover. What I love about this, you'll notice it has Edición Dominical Verde. Well, it's the green Sunday edition, because there's also you see opposite there, a sepia or purple one. They published 2 editions on Sunday. It came out every day and twice on Sunday. And this is, I mean, it's not like 4 pages or something. Each one is something like, I don't know, it's 48 pages. 48 pages in every one, every day and twice on Sunday. You just go, I don't know anywhere that does that. It makes manga look sort of lazy.
That's absolutely crazy.
It's incredible. And it's called Diario de Novelas Gráficas. So, daily. And these sold in huge numbers. They have probably, it's one of the world's biggest comic cultures. Not now, admittedly, but in its time, vast sales. And stories that, again, I don't think these were collected, I don't think, but they were probably were films. But also what's fascinating, when I was in Mexico, I got to meet a friend there, Luis Gantus, who's done some wonderful publishing, curating, runs a fantastic festival there. I went to his studio, essentially, and he showed me artwork for these Mexican comics. And if you look at them, you think, well, these must be photographed. But no, more accurately, what they would do is they would photograph the actors, obviously the people playing the parts, in multiple expressions and poses, and they would cut out often just the heads, and then they would stick them down and draw the rest of the panel. So it's a sort of collage mixing of, and they could, and so if you look closely, the fashions and the backgrounds are not photographic. So of course, this is the whole point. Photocomics, which is a huge interesting area I want to do something about as well, and normally rely on finding a location, getting people dressed up in the right outfits. Well, you can't do that every day and twice on Sunday, but you can do this. You've got all the characters in the story, multiple photographs, different sizes, I presume as well, I think probably, and then you can do some photographic-y, washy looking artwork, and you get these episodes coming out every day.
That explains how fast it could produce that.
Yeah.
14 pages. Yeah. Absolutely. And do it in a way.
And the big problem here is any of it really good? I mean, there's going to be a level. A lot of it we know it's going to be churned out, and there probably are. I'm gradually befriending and connecting many different people, not just in Mexico, but other Mexicans in Europe, and one in Japan I've managed to connect with. But it's yet to coalesce into a book and exhibition. But I think something it just needs to happen. And I know Angoulême has talked about we must do something on Mexican comics, but it needs to be something that really puts it on the map. In a way, I think that needs to
these are articles that you just collect and that you may want to use in an exhibition, or do you really want to do research on them?
Well, yeah, good question. I'm constantly learning. I think like all of it. So, and sometimes it's studying, sometimes it's, as I said, you saw, I'm buying some artwork, not knowing where it's come from, researching, that is another way of doing it. But of course I have to focus when something becomes my priority. So other things are rather like just brewing in the background, waiting for the right moments to come together. And I've already discussed it with a few venues and certainly a few possible collaborators as to how we might be able to do something on Mexican comics in the future. It needs to happen. This is an interesting artist that I think is worth just ending on briefly, I think. But again, one of the things that's wonderful about comics are the things that are overlooked and often forgotten. And this is a Belgian artist, Georges Bervin, I guess is how you say his name, not a name I knew about. He's a big name in illustration, book illustration, and children's books illustration as well, but I didn't realize he'd done comics. These, of course, are comics without balloons, but they were drawn for Journal de Tintin. It turned out that both Jacobs, it could be Jacobs and Hergé, were enormous admirers of Bervin and wanted him to do something in the magazine for them. And he's refused to do balloons. He said, I'm going to go back to this text format. He was adapting a novel, a kind of piratey novel. I'm not very sure about the story yet, because I've only just discovered this in the last couple of weeks properly. I knew about it being rediscovered and being republished, but I thought this has got more to it. It's not just something obscure and interesting, because it has such an effect on modern French, Belgian, particularly French, it seems, comics. But the drawing style is just sublime. And you think, this is 1950, this is Tintin, could not be further away from the ligne claire, from the exactitude, the precision, the over-precision, you might argue, of the ligne claire, which is lovely, of course, but this is free and gestural and calligraphic and inky. It's got influences of people like Ronald Searle, the great British artist, and certainly many other artists too, I'm sure. And it's absolutely charming. And it turned out that when this was discovered, it wasn't forgotten. There were younger artists, for example, Alec Severin, who I've known about since at least maybe the 80s, absolutely a genius, not really known about that as well as he should be outside of France and Belgium, at least it seems to me, but an amazingly talented artist and storyteller. And he loved Bervin's work. You could absolutely see it in his work. And he encouraged this shop, wonderful shop and gallery in Brussels, La Crypte Tonique, run by Philippe Capard, to not only reissue this material, they managed to locate all the artworks, actually not all of them, 2/3 of them, I think. Otherwise, they were able to restore from the printed pages, but they're exquisitely beautiful drawings. In a deluxe edition that's come out, I think, 2 years ago now. And, but even more important than that to me, they've also done a little sort of documentary booklet, which you can download as a PDF for free, just to read up about it, explaining about his work, but also explaining how it has had such an effect. And this is a summary of that, which is really striking, because you realize, of course, working comic artists are always sharing discoveries, always sharing ideas. And look what I found. I found this. What do you think of this? So Severin met Joan Sfar in Brussels at a comics festival and was showing him this material. And then Sfar was really impressed with it. And in fact, at the time Sfar was working in his studio, the Atelier, I think it's the Atelier Vosges, it was one, I think in Rue Quincampoix in Paris, is where they was working with people like Guibert and Christophe Blain, all these amazing Nouvelle Vague, Nouvelle Bande Dessinée creators. And this work by Bervin had a huge influence on them. This is just a documentary section from this explaining that effect. And if you look at something like Blain's Isaac the Pirate, the big noses, the gestural drawing, not just the subject matter obviously as well, but I mean, that's just one. I mean, Sfar, Blain, many others. Guibert, we know, is a huge admirer of, as well of Bervin. It's not just a question of copying, but just channeling that loose freedom of drawing, that an expression that has been rediscovered. So I love the fact that this kind of thing can happen. That in other words, that you have a system that's in place, this stuck system of this is what Belgian comics, French Belgian comics look like, and then something. Well, no, they didn't always look like that. It looked like this, and that can be that gene pool or that seed can be refound and reintroduced, and suddenly a generation is doing this nouvelle bande dessinée and making extraordinary works. So yeah, this is the last image I think I've wanted to show you, because I'm hoping this will come in the next few days, maybe the next week. On the left is the original artwork for this page from Jimmy Olsen, which takes me full circle back to seeing Kirby's work at the ICA and the New Gods material. And I've never spent so much money on a piece of artwork before, and I'm guilty, really. And I probably say, well, it's an investment. Well, of course, it's not an investment, and it's not actually even really nostalgia. Much as I love, obviously, it's the comic I loved when I was young. I just looked at it, reread it recently, and thought this is a beautiful piece of storytelling, of dialogue, of the body language. I mean, that image there of Superman sitting there, arms crossed, legs crossed, just chilling out with Hi Father. It's a lovely, and Kirby is not all about bombast and explosions and the technology, and much as I love all of that in Kirby, but isn't that just a gloriously beautiful image? And the message of this page, I read it, was like, this is one of the, I realized this is one of the endings of Kirby's Fourth World and New Gods. It's one of the endings. There's several endings, but this one essentially creates the circle and the loop of Superman understanding that he doesn't belong in Supertown, in New Genesis, with all the other new gods like him, superpowered. He belongs back on Earth. And there's a beautiful phrase that Kirby writes here: Superman hesitates fleetingly, then with a surge of rightness, he clutches the staff. And I think that's just, I mean, Kirby is a great writer as well as a great storyteller and visual artist. To say that surge of rightness, Superman knowing that he doesn't want to spend his life living in this kind of world of superpower characters. He wants to look after Earth, and he's adopted us, basically. He's our savior in some ways. But just a lovely page. So that's coming in post. And I've had to really look. I've looked at so many absurd prices for Kirby artwork. I've gone, I mean, I could sell everything and live in a box, and I have a piece of Kirby artwork. I'm not a wealthy man by any means, but this is something where I just thought this means, I just knew I had felt that same surge of rightness when I had the chance to buy it. I thought, this is the one that speaks to me. Yeah. And so it's not, I'm actually quite against nostalgia, by the way. I don't want, I have a little credo I made up when I was in Sao Paulo once, and it boils down to no nostalgia, no loyalty, no limits. I don't really think about that all the time, but by any means. But it boils down to the fact that I don't want to get caught up in just liking what I read when I was 10 or 12 on that deck chair. And I'm afraid I'm not very loyal to any companies. God damn the companies. I'm certainly not getting about publishing companies. Well, maybe some I do, but mostly I want to really stay loyal to creators who are continuing to surprise or develop or make work that speaks to me and also speaks of them and their experience. And then lastly, no limits, because in my opinion, you know, there should be no limits on this medium.
All right. So
there's a limit on time, though, and a limit on how much I can keep talking, because the word conversation and interview have really been jettisoned. Once again.
No, it's been really great to listen to your presentation, and I mean, getting to know a little bit more about your work as a writer, you know, as a curator, you know, and also as a collector of comics, right? But I just wanted to finish off this encounter with you with talking very briefly about some suggestions that you made, right? Some recommendations of British contemporary British.
Oh
authors,
yes, okay. right.
So so if I could just share with you my PowerPoint, you know, a PowerPoint
So I stop sharing this then?
Yeah, if you can, you
stop sharing. There we go.
Correct, right? So I mean, you really have a fascination with comics, right? I mean,
I guess
a lifetime fascination.
An unhealthy one, but yes.
No. It's quite healthy. It's quite healthy. But
Well, I'm very lucky. I mean, you're lucky too. If you think about it, you love comics. I imagine you're not just doing this as,
right.
Academic exercise. You are doing it because it's something you feel a lot about. And we're all lucky to be able to find some avenue to convey that, express that, inspire it in others, and make some sort of living from what we love. Not everyone gets to make their passion their job, and this isn't a job. I mean, it's correct.
This is the artist that you talked about, Shintaro Kago,
yes.
And as you said, he has some like impressive images,
Yes.
And
that's put you off your food, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, we don't see there's not need to see too much Shintaro Kago. As I said earlier, for me, this is great fun and horrific, and it's the eroguro, the erotic grotesque genre. But where he's slightly more interesting is when he's also really, really playing with the medium and subverting it and and challenging what we can do with it.
Right.
So
and you also recommended some.
Yeah, there's the British artists. Yeah, British artists, British books. This is the same guy, John Harris Dunning. It's not recommending it just because I am a friend of John Harris Dunning by any means. I didn't know who he was. It's still a really well-written book, and the artist is pretty new. He's I'm hoping he can make some more comics. It was very demanding on him, but he comes slightly more from an animation fine art mixture background, and he brings in lots of very interesting influences, which are very fresh. The storyline revolves around a woman with multiple personality disorder, hence this scary, almost showing it right after Shintaro Kago. It looks like Shintaro Kago because that face has been sliced up into different personalities. Twist them. So it's kind of appropriate you show Kago before that. But it's a debut graphic novel, came out in the UK. It's been published in French. I think there may be other editions coming out as well. It's great. It's really compelling and original, and it uses the language of comics and the coloring actually in comics really cleverly to convey the different worlds of the protagonist, or more accurately, the mystery of this great love interest that the lead character has. This woman that isn't one person but many.
Mongrel.
Yeah, Mongrel. This is an extraordinary book. Yeah, I mean, this is the book that's come out. This is Sarah Begum is British, but she's Muslim British artist. It's her first graphic novel, I think, and it's got some tremendously powerful spreads. I mean, the graphics are really, really inventive, and she's come to comics and just really blown it wide open as to the layout and the texturing, the use of the page, and it is conveying the family trauma of her falling in love for a non-Muslim man. So this is dealing with real life, but also dealing with very personal life. Yeah, and this is Hannah Eaton. This is a really great book. It's the drawings actually mostly in pencil. I think that's right, fair to say. Yeah, mostly in pencil work. It's long. I mean, it's 350 pages. This is what we're getting now. Graphic novels aren't a little 48-page bande dessinée album, much as we love them. These people are making, substantial, meaty reads. And what's clever about this one is from the cover, of course, you get the sense of a slightly eerie, it's like Blair Witch Project kind of thing. It's a kind of Wicker Man. It's the English countryside as a rather dark, dangerous place. And it has that aspect to it, but also it deals with quite tough social issues of today because of in its dreadful Brexit atmosphere, the whole distrust of foreigners, of the xenophobia. This is something that she tackles really, very, very powerfully.
Right.
So it's a substantial work. And Shame Pudding is just one of the most charming and funny debut graphic novels I've read. It's wonderful. It is her memory of two lovely grandmothers. She's Jewish, from a Jewish family background. Laugh out loud. Drawn with the most, I mean, it's not drawn brilliantly. It's drawn in a kind of very loose, scribbly kind of Sompe kind of style, I guess you might say. but it's just charming, absolutely charming. It won actually with Posey Simmons, actually, it won the prize this year, new prize introduced in this country for comedy women in print, as in comedy writers who are women, and they added a new category for comics. And this won it alongside not Marjorie, Cassandra Dark. Sorry, Cassandra Dark. That's right. What's that? Cassandra Dark. Yeah. Oh yeah, and this is well, embroidery and lino cut combined. It's hard to describe this. We showed some pages from it in the British Library exhibition. Gareth is doing a story here about a boy, an adolescent boy, who decides he can't get a girlfriend, so he'll make his own girlfriend out of found bits of clothing and other objects. And it's very funny. It's not at all nasty. It's not a horror thing. It's actually just very touching about a kid growing up, I think probably in the 70s, I think, without an awful lot of sex education at school, and his fantasies about women and girls, and it's just aesthetically using embroidery, which of course is an extraordinarily difficult medium to work with. And not typical of a man to be doing either. Gareth was taught by his mum, but tremendous. That is a field you may not realize. There is a field of embroidery comics. There are artists doing this, and they're doing amazing things. And yeah, Dragman, Stephen Appleby, just reviewed recently for the Times Literary Supplement, which is one of the nice perks that's happening now. We get literary reviews of graphic novels, and Dragman is it's not a superhero, essentially. Although it's imagining a nightmare superhero world of London 2020, essentially, with the Shard. You recognize that horrific, huge skyscraper we have in the city, a symbol, of course, of greed and the financial markets. But Dragman is a man who basically has to face his true self and realize that he is a woman. He wants to dress as a woman, and he's also dealing with the challenges of being a superhero, which in this world he's invented. Stephen Appleby has invented. It's based on the fact Stephen Appleby is also identified as a man, but is dressing and living as a woman. In this world he's invented, the soul is a marketable and tradable object. People are getting. If you're poor, you can sell your soul, and there's a market for souls. And you can get, it's a dark story, kind of Faustian kind of storyline, but in present day with brilliant pastiches of the superhero genre as well. The whole scene where the character Dragman has to audition to join the official club. You cannot be a superhero unless you're in the official club of the superheroes. And then you can start charging insurance, because nobody gets rescued in this world unless you've got superhero insurance. Otherwise, you just drop to the ground and you die. This is a mercenary world, I tell you. Yeah, tremendous. Really, very
right. Well, I mean, and that's it. It's been a lovely chat. Yeah, I mean, we've learned a lot, and we're going to keep this video and probably watch it again. To
anyway, anyone wants to reach me, it's just paulgravett.com is my website, so they can message me through that, of course.
It's been a fabulous talk.
Thank you. I'm sorry that it was really rather one-sided.
No, it wasn't. And the whole breadth and wealth of it's a real treasure trove what we have of images in there, and pick up from the past, from the future, from what we have in the present right now. Yeah. It's really astonishing. It's really astonishing.
Thank you. Well, we're all, everyone is you're doing your tremendous contributions to this world of comics that we're in now, which I think we must have imagined somehow. We're all imagining it. It's all coming true bit by bit. Isn't it amazing? I mean, it is a huge worldwide group effort of creators and thinkers to make comics find their place.
Absolutely. And to reinvent the use of them pedagogically speaking as well. For example, with a pedagogical dimension, which is still many ways unexplored as well. Many things that can be done.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It is so rich. In many ways, I do feel that it's the least exhausted medium. I kind of feel I mean, Alan Moore's talked about this, how we've been through a phase of culture where a lot of TV and literature and music has just been kind of recycling. It hasn't been fresh, it hasn't been like an energy of, say, punk coming along or something else like that. And in comics, that's certainly, there's still aspects of that, but there's still a lot of invention. That's perhaps the one thing I would like to end on. I do regret, I love Alan's, and I love Alan's work, but it's just such a shame that he has moved away from comics for many obvious reasons. There are a lot of things wrong with the commercial side of comics, but I don't think he will. I hope he will come back to them, because he contributed so much, and I think he will still realize that this medium in its fullest flowering, which we're still seeing, and he knows it's still actually developing, he'll want to contribute more to it, I think.
So thanks very much for being with us.
Jose.
And we hope that you follow our conference, and if we have future editions, we'll keep in touch, and maybe we can meet you in person. We
can have a high touch rather than high tech at some point.
We really look forward to that.
Very much so. Yeah, lovely. But very best of luck for the rest of the conference, and I'll be listening in.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.